as Nintendo Switch 2 users are warning of consoles being bricked for using MIG switches. Yeah, Nintendo warned gamers, you try to hack the Switch 2 and we will brick your console. And gamers are quickly learning that Nintendo does not mess around. Yeah, in fact, if this is the first you're hearing about this, Nintendo's new Switch 2 is now available, and the terms of agreement from Nintendo say, you acknowledge that if you fail to comply with the foregoing restrictions, Nintendo may render the Nintendo account services or applicable Nintendo device permanently unusable in whole or in part. Essentially saying, if you mess around, or if you try to hack your Switch 2, we're going to disable your internet and we're going to brick your console. Which many thought Nintendo wouldn't go this far, right? People were like, okay, they just put that in there to scare people. They're not actually going to do this. In fact, there's a very valid argument that if I buy a console, I, as the console owner, should be able to do whatever I want with it. But in the world of Nintendo, Nintendo says, no, you buy that console, you're essentially renting the Switch 2 from us because if you modify it, if you hack it, if you make any changes, we are going to brick the utter hell out of your console. And despite multiple complaints from the modding community, Nintendo doesn't care. In fact, Nintendo is actively drinking the tears of the modding community because this week we learned that MIG Switch will violate Nintendo Switch 2's terms of agreements, which we kind of knew it violated the Nintendo Switch 1 agreement, but there wasn't really any major punishments. However, we found out that multiple Switch 2 owners are now saying that their Switch 2s are completely unable to connect to online services, with one Reddit user saying, I don't know what happened. I used the MIG switch and now I can't connect to the internet, which, come on, dude. You know what happened. You put the MIG switch in, you knew what you were doing, you knew there was a risk. That's like when I was in high school and I got a virus on my computer and my parents were like, what were you doing? I was like, looking at stocks. Just looking at stocks. I was looking at stocks and trades and forums, and next thing I knew, there was a bunch of boobs all over the computer, and now I can't sign in. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably hearing this story right now, and you're asking the question, what the hell's a MIG switch? Because before this week, I didn't know what a MIG switch was, but essentially, this is an SD cartridge that allows users to back up their games or load pirated video games on them. And while most claim that they're using this for legitimate practices, such as backing up your Nintendo Switch cartridges, in the eyes of Nintendo here, these are acts of piracy. And I know what some might be thinking is like, oh, it's just a one-time thing. Nintendo might not be taking this. No, multiple users are reporting this. In fact, one user over on X reported similar issues and actually sent out a warning saying, I strongly recommend that you do not use the MIG switch. It was already very risky to use, but it is even more risky to do it with the Switch 2. And the majority of the users have been impacted by this, have already confirmed that their consoles aren't bricked. Right? They can still play games on the local cartridges, but they're unable to get updates, and they're unable to access multiplayer on anything else. So, essentially, Nintendo's like, yeah, no. We are not messing around with this. Which I do think the first hacker, or the first modder, if we want to use that term, that figures out a way to reset this and figure out a way to reverse Nintendo's, flag policy where your console is pretty much completely disabled, will be a big win, and they will make a ton of money. And look, I'm very split on this issue, because on one hand, I understand Nintendo is trying to prevent piracy and end their war against emulation. But for Nintendo to take the stance that, we're going to nuke your console if you use it in a way that we don't deem correct is very sus. Especially when it's $499 to get this console. But it also makes me super concerned about the resale market, because that's going to be very questionable. Facebook Marketplace is probably going to have a lot of Switch 2s that are either flagged and cannot access the internet, or they're completely bricked if Nintendo continues these policies. So I would definitely recommend, if you're going to buy a Switch 2, buy it new. Don't take a discount this generation, because it doesn't sound like it's going to play out. If the deal sounds too good to be true, it's too good to be true. And the legality here is going to be interesting, because I know we've seen lawsuits against console manufacturers voiding warranties if you open it up to clean your console. And I wonder if Nintendo is potentially opening themselves up for legal issues here with this new Switch 2 policy, because I could totally see a case where you're like, dude, I paid $500 for this thing. You bricked it because I tried to do something special with it. No, that shouldn't lie. And who knows? That might be the next big legal case on the gaming side that we get to see over the next few years. But sound off in the comment section. Do you think that we should be able to customize our Nintendo Switches, or do you think Nintendo's completely warranted with these actions? I'm very interested to hear your thoughts.